Well, you knew this video was coming. Welcome to Baltic World. My name is Crispin. It is with great delight and humility that I report a spectacular and historic victory of the Ukrainian defenders over the Russian invaders in the east of Ukraine. It is absolutely decisive. I'll explain what happened. If you find value in this discussion, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It helps grow the channel a ton. But let's get into it. Ukraine launched a massive counteroffensive to retake Kharkiv Oblast in the north across a huge front. The result has been beyond anyone's wildest imagining. The Russian army has experienced total collapse. Ukrainian forces have liberated over 3,000 square kilometers in the space of just 72 hours. They're exploiting that victory and pushing south towards Mariupol. The entirety of Kharkiv Oblast at the time of this recording has been totally liberated. Russian troops have been pushed back across the border. So how did this happen? Well, much has been said of the huge disinformation campaign about a supposed counteroffensive in the south in Kherson. We talked about it here on the channel briefly. This definitely played a role, but not for the reasons that have been widely reported. The core strategy was actually a fair bit simpler. Russia has been defending a huge front of 2,400 kilometers and could not possibly be everywhere given the number of troops it had available in Ukraine. To exploit this, Ukraine launched probing attacks simultaneously across the entire front line, trying to find a weak point. Ukraine's fast-moving mechanized forces exploited one of these in the occupied town of Balaklia and began pouring through. By the time Russian reserves were sent to plug the breach, Ukrainian reinforcements had already arrived to support the advance, and they encircled the nearby occupied city, isolating it and continuing to push, managing to seize the key rail choke point of Kupiansk. This was the decisive blow. Russian forces in the region were concentrated at Izium and are entirely resupplied through this rail network. The loss of this junction severed the artery of Russia's occupation in Donbass, leaving Russian forces completely cut off from the motherland. Once word spread that Ukraine's forces had penetrated as far as Kupiansk, panic spread throughout the entire Russian army. Russia's backline reserve forces that would have sought to expel Ukrainian troops from that rail junction had been redirected to support the supposed counteroffensive near Kherson. Meanwhile, Ukrainian units poured into the breach to continue pushing the advance, moving out in literally every direction. The vanguard forces then swung south towards Izium in the north, while Ukraine's southern forces pushed north in a pincer maneuver. Russian forces at Izium then began a panicked withdrawal. At this point, their only hope of saving the situation for Russia was utilizing air superiority to pulverize the advancing Ukrainian units and stall the advance. However, the clever deployment of American surface-to-air missiles and German mobile anti-aircraft guns negated this. While in the chaos, Russian pilots could scarcely distinguish between friend and foe. Russian forces, terrified of encirclement and with most roads and bridges destroyed, fled on foot, leaving all heavy armor and ammunition behind to the Ukrainian forces. This included massive stockpiles in Izium itself. The consequence is the total annihilation of Russia's northern forces, the capturing of thousands of Russian troops, and the permanent severing of key supply lines to Russian forces in Kherson and the Donetsk regions. It is quite simply the most comprehensive military victory in any conflict waged since the First Gulf War. The whole northeast of Ukraine has now been liberated. Incidentally, I'm excited to report that Ukraine's mobile vanguard achieved its thrust riding Australian-developed Bushmaster rapid assault vehicles. Ukrainian troops who liberated Izium have released a video, I won't play that here, thanking Australians for the equipment necessary to exploit this breach. So how did this happen? Well, first, yes, the much telegraphed Kherson counteroffensive had an impact in repositioning Russia's interior reserve forces. Ukraine also began its probing attacks in the Kherson region, which led the Russians to believe that this was Ukraine's overall counteroffensive. The limited success of these attacks against heavily reinforced positions led to extreme cockiness and arrogance among the Russian troops about the ability of Ukraine's defense force to conduct large-scale offensive military operations. However, if I was to point to a single cause, and future students of war will pore over this conflict for many years to come, but if I was to point to a single cause, I would say it was the command and control of Russia's defense force. Fearing punishment, Russian field commanders have proven reluctant to take the initiative or respond to rapidly changing conditions. The consequence is that decision-making in Russia is highly centralized up the chain of command. This was devastatingly exploited by Ukraine's forces, who are highly motivated, with decision-making devolved to the lowest reasonable level. By attacking dozens of areas across a massive front simultaneously, senior Russian officers could not possibly respond flexibly to them all, which left field commanders paralyzed. It was then up to the soldiers to find weak points and pour through unchecked. As the true scale of this disaster disseminates through the ranks of the Russian forces and throughout Russia itself, the situation for the Russian government is becoming destabilized. There are already reports of some mutiny in Russia's southern armies. The Chechens have begun openly abusing senior Russian officers. Other reports claim that those close to Putin initially were reluctant to report the full scale of the military disaster. The sheer quantity of military equipment captured in just the last 3 days exceeds all that provided by Western Europe to Ukraine in the past 10 years. At the time of this recording, Ukraine's forces are seeking to exploit this victory, with reports of a new offensive pushing south towards the Sea of Azov and Mariupol. Even in Russia's tightly controlled media, some Russian talking heads have devolved into a blame game and scapegoating for the failure in Ukraine. There are now some concerns that Ukraine could overextend and outrun its supply lines. Personally, I'm not worried about that right now. I think keeping up the pressure, exploiting Russia's disarray before the winter, justifies these risks. The implications of Ukraine's victory is simply eye-watering. Ukraine has an immense morale boost alongside the major strategic gains. Putin's regime may well be teetering, and perhaps most importantly, those claiming in the West that support for Ukraine only prolongs the stalemate and suffering have been totally silenced. There is now no question as to the commitment to support Ukraine as proven winners to liberate every inch of their territory. They can count on the support of governments around the free world to see that it happens. Ukraine's victories make this much easier. It's been a big challenge for democratic politicians to sell the cost of this conflict, both in inflation and direct donation to its own people. Now it's easy. People all across the world can buy into Ukraine's success. The opposite is true for Russia. Moscow's best hope for victory was for the winter to set in, gas prices to skyrocket, and for those supporting Ukraine to decide it's not worth it for a lost cause. Given Russia's disastrous military situation and the renewed fortitude among Western allies, Moscow has no realistic pathway to victory. The only thing Russia can do now is full military mobilization if it wants to prolong the war, and that will have massive attendant risks for revolution at home. Its other choice is to negotiate complete withdrawal. What I expect will happen is that Ukraine will exhaust itself trying to take as much territory as possible before the winter, and then when the weather makes further major operations impractical for both sides, Russia will have to make the hard choices between winter and spring. In short, Ukraine's victory is totally historic. It's stunning and I think decisive. The war is not over, but from here on, Russia is only fighting to prevent a defeat. I will keep you updated on developments as they arrive, and as always, please leave your comments and thoughts down below. Thank you for following me so far, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.